in the 19th century, scholars like William James, Sir Charles Richet, a Nobel laureate in physiology, Sir William Crookes, Sir Oliver Lodge, some of the leading physiologists, physicists, and psychologists of their era were all intensely interested not only in consciousness, but in the question of survival of consciousness after the death of the physical body. Yet something happened to dampen that interest.
You're right, and I think that it seemed to happen in the early 1900s. And I think, first of all, I should say that even when William James was talking about those things, he also knew that there were materialist scientists out there that would question him. And I think when he wrote his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, he talks about those people that say that meditation and transformational experiences are due to pathology, basically. So he recognized that there were still those skeptics at that time. But then what seems to happen, as you were commenting on, is that around the early 1900s, something else began to happen. I think it was this, what we would often call in science, the Skinnerian point of view, the stimulus response point of view in psychology and in neuroscience, where we began to take everything down to that neuronal perspective of input and output being the major way that we look at behavior. And for whatever the reasons, that was dominant until the 1960s, 1970s, et cetera. And I grew up in that era where we literally did not want to acknowledge that anything else like a consciousness beyond the activity of neurons on our brain could possibly exist.
Some people say that it was the Council of Trent where the church sort of defended its domain. Anything having to do with consciousness was the province of the church, and science could have everything else.
Yeah, and I think that that's also definitely true. And I think what people say is that at that time, the church was doing things like beheading people, burning them at the stake. They were doing terrible things if they actually believed that, in fact, the earth was not the center of the universe. And what I think we found is since then, the scientists have felt what that schism felt like to them back then. They've carried that with them, and they want to be sure that we keep anything that even smacks of a little bit of spiritualism outside of their domain and not even to discuss it. So they have actually defined science very narrowly and have considered it only related to the material universe, even though the universe may be much, much broader than that.
And as a result, it seems as if a lot of empirical evidence gets discarded. I talk to people occasionally, and they say, well, there's no evidence whatsoever for parapsychology. So I cite various articles, and then they'll say, well, I'm so busy. If it's not in a mainstream scientific journal, I can't afford to pay attention to it.
Yes, and you're right. And I think that's one real issue. And I've noticed that myself. Before I actually had my first experience in meditation, I never even would think of looking in PubMed, again, this major medical index, for subject matter like near-death experiences or energy healing, Reiki, things of that sort. I would just assume that there would be nothing there because we scientists would never study it. And I was shocked when then after I began to meditate and I became curious, I then went to PubMed and I found that there were articles like again and again on energy healing, on Reiki, on near-death experiences that actually showed that these are phenomena that have been carefully studied and have actually been shown to exist and be valid forms of in energy, the case of energy healing, a valid form of healing. It does work.
What would be your advice today to a young graduate student who wants to do let's say, a dissertation in one of these areas?
Wow. So I think the first thing I would say to them, and I think most neuroscientists would say this to them, is be sure that you have the major topic of your dissertation in something that is considered credible to your materialist colleagues and your professors that you're working with. And then perhaps have an additional area that you can begin working on that begins to try to perhaps expand that into the area of parapsychology or consciousness or something like that. But I say that because I have learned that to get tenure at a major university, you need to actually have the support of everyone in your department and at higher levels of your college and your university administration. And if they see something that they feel might actually reduce their credibility, they will not even let you touch that topic because they are always thinking about their own fellow scientists. So show that you're credible and that you are a good scientist following the usual scientific method in regular domains of science, and then begin to expand that into other areas, because your own credibility will then, in the one area, will go over into the credibility in other areas as well.